This was a frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation.
What a week. Not only has Luigi Mangione been indicted on murder and terrorism charges in New York, but he also has a major hearing in Pennsylvania too. We're going to break down these new charges and what to expect at his preliminary and extradition hearings. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It is official. Luigi Mangione has been indicted in New York in connection with the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. And I'll tell you what, this might have been a little bit of a surprise that he was actually charged with 3 counts of murder, and 2 of those are related to terrorism. Yeah, so he was charged with murder in the first degree in furtherance of terrorism, and 2 counts of murder in the second degree, one of which is charged also as a killing in an act of furtherance of terrorism, and 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree, 4 counts of criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree, 1 count of criminal possession of a weapon in the fourth degree, and 1 count of criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree. And I want to read you the language of the first degree murder charge in the indictment, because this, again, was a little bit of a surprise. It reads, "The defendant, with intent to cause the death of another person, caused the death of Brian Thompson, and said person was killed in furtherance of an act of terrorism involving a violent act and acts dangerous to human life that were in violation of the criminal laws of this state and were intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policies of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping." So the idea here being that he allegedly killed Thompson in Midtown Manhattan during the hustle and bustle of the day. People are all around. This is an act in and of itself that is frightening and an act of terror. But moreover, they will prove he did this to try to change healthcare policy, as evidenced by his alleged writings in a manifesto, a notebook, that he had this deep-rooted anger towards UnitedHealthcare and our healthcare system and health insurance. And perhaps by allegedly writing, it had to be done, this was a way to create change, to influence people to rise up, to influence our health insurance industry, to influence our government maybe. I mean, to think about that, look at the amount of outpouring and support that Mangione has gotten since his arrest. And also, by the way, even before his arrest, people had been sort of justifying the murder of Brian Thompson. Now, we've seen this in a certain segment of the population, hopefully only a small segment of the population, and hopefully a part that will not sit on a future jury. But I will tell you, I didn't even know for sure if it was a foregone conclusion that Mangione would even be indicted in New York because of this support, because of this fanfare. Sure, the evidence right now is strong against him. Surveillance, ballistics, fingerprints, fake ID, and sure, the burden of proof to get back an indictment is relatively low. You just need probable cause, but I don't know. Maybe some random New Yorkers would feel a sense to protect him. But no, they returned an indictment, which, based on the evidence, in my legal opinion, was the right decision. Now, proving beyond a reasonable doubt at trial that he's guilty of all the offenses, we can have a conversation about that. But I will also say, I think Manhattan prosecutors charged him so aggressively, this terrorist count, to make a point that this will not be tolerated. First-degree murder carries life in prison. And I think especially making a point considering there are reports of increased chatter about copycat attacks. Prosecutors are taking this incredibly serious. I mean, it's being reported by outlets like Newsweek that a company has launched a card game called Most Wanted CEO, where each card shines a spotlight on a different titan of greed, complete with a QR code linking to a dedicated web page exposing their dirtiest deeds. And this labeling of other CEOs, according to the New York Post, the founder of this company says he was inspired by the most wanted Iraqi playing card decks that were given to military members during the Iraq invasion in the early 2000s. So the fact that you're seeing this, I think this is a way to deter future action, hopefully. Now, we're going to talk about the charges, and we're going to talk about the fact that this week there is a big hearing on Thursday in Altoona, Pennsylvania. So Mangione has a preliminary hearing in Pennsylvania on the charges that he was initially arrested for there. So possession of an unlicensed firearm, forgery, providing false identification to police, and there will also be an extradition hearing because while it is possible Mangione may waive extradition, there is also a possibility he may still contested. So we're going to talk about all that. But first, I also just want to highlight something else that came out during that press conference. So Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg listed out the actual timeline of events now that we are 2 weeks out from the killing. So the idea here is Mangione went from Hawaii to New York.
On November 24th, we allege that the defendant arrived in New York City to murder Brian Thompson. After the defendant arrived in New York City on a bus at Port Authority, he checked into the hostel on the Upper West Side using the name Mark Rosario with a fake New Jersey ID. On the morning of December 4th, the defendant left the hostel, just after 5:30 a.m. and traveled to Midtown. For nearly an hour, we allege the defendant waited in the area near the Hilton Hotel, waiting for Mr. Thompson to appear. From 6:38 a.m. to 6:44 a.m., the defendant stood across from the entrance of the hotel on West 54th Street. When he saw Mr. Thompson, he crossed the street and approached him from behind. We allege he then took out a 9mm 3D printed ghost gun, equipped with a 3D printed suppressor, and shot him once in the back and once in the leg. The defendant then fled northeast on 54th Street and took an e-bike uptown before getting into a taxi that took him to West 178th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. On December 9th, the defendant was spotted at McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The local police were notified, he was arrested, and he was found with a 9mm handgun, a suppressor, 2 ammunition magazines, and the same fake New Jersey ID he used at the hostel.
Interesting to see that breakdown. Again, goes to the idea of a planned, targeted, premeditated attack. Hey, by the way, as you know, we have been trying to cover every aspect of this Mangione story as it develops. And for that, I have to thank our incredible sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, because it's with their support that we're able to produce these episodes. Now, here's the deal about Morgan & Morgan. If you're injured, America's largest injury law firm may be who you want in your corner. I mean, Morgan & Morgan has a dedicated team of over 1,000 attorneys. They have case specialists, paralegals, investigators, incredible track record. Recent verdicts like $12 million in Florida and $26 million in Philadelphia, higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. There's no upfront fee. The whole process can be done right from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. All right, so let's talk about the charges and what to expect this week with criminal defense attorney Lara Uretzian. Lara, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Were you surprised by these murder charges? I should say these murder terrorism charges, and will it be tough to prove?
Not surprised by the murder charges, but I was surprised by the terrorism charges because we don't typically see them in these types of cases, right? Usually people connect terrorism to political assassinations. It's just a different type of a world or a set of crimes. And in this case, look, it could backfire on the prosecution. I mean, we know why they're doing it. They probably are using it. They're going to, inflate this and overcharge, basically, so that at the end of the day, the two sides, the defense and the prosecution, meet somewhere where the prosecution is more comfortable as far as a deal or a plea bargain. But it could also backfire. What if there is no plea bargain? What if you've got public opinion, really, it sounds at least from what I've been reading, has been in support of Luigi. People, for some reason, relate to it. And it sounds like he's not the only person who has an issue.
Isn't that the point, though? So if I'm going back to the statute and you're talking about an intentional killing that was done in further of terrorism, and that is intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or influence the policies of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. When you're talking about changes in the healthcare industry, you're talking about people rising up, and you're seeing people jumping on this bandwagon, is that going to be evidence that helps prove that this was a terrorist attack, that it was done for the purposes of something much greater, in his opinion, than just killing Brian Thompson?
Well, it looks like these were consequences of the act, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what was intended, right? Again, we still don't know a lot. We have no idea what was going on in this individual's mind. It sounds like he may have had some real or serious mental health issues, may have been depressed, maybe there's something that he needs to be evaluated.
Well, what
That's
about the
a start.
writings? What about the writings, the
And
manifesto, the
again,
notebook? Isn't that evidence? When he writes things like, going after these parasites, it had to be done, railing against the health insurance industry, isn't that help the terrorist charge?
Look, it may help a little bit, but it doesn't mean that they can prove the charge, because the intent would have to be to intimidate a civil population. And it's clearly not to intimidate the majority of the population, right? It's one individual only. And the other two elements are to influence policies of a unit of a government and to affect the conduct of a government through murder. And is that what he was truly planning on doing? Was that his intent? Did he even really, was he of sound mind to have come up or made that decision, right? So there's a lot here. And I think with public opinion kind of in his support, and this is something that came after, I don't necessarily think he expected. That is truly a surprise, I think, to everybody. I would have never expected it myself. This wave of support, we would have never expected that, right?
Let me ask you this. But let me ask you this. What about the fact the killing happened in Midtown Manhattan? A lot of people around. One person on the tape you see runs away. Does that make it a form of terroristic murder?
No, because then you could pretty much point at any murder. So then just because he happens to be an executive or a CEO of an insurance company, so then automatically it's a terrorist act. We've had murders happen in broad daylight all over the place.
I get it.
Situations. So that shouldn't be enough. No.
Let me ask you this. What about, do you think that, you read the indictment, does the first charge, first degree murder, the terrorism component, and the second degree murder, the terrorism component, and remember, he's also charged with second degree murder, just intent to kill. So if the terrorism doesn't work, they can just get him convicted on intent to kill another human being. But do you find that those two charges, the first degree murder and the second degree murder, are almost identical, and the defense could file a motion that it's duplicative and one should be thrown out?
It's possible. I can't tell you for sure because I would have to go back and look at the differences and as far as New York law is concerned. But there may be some issues on the first one. I wouldn't be surprised if they file a motion to dismiss the first charge because I think that they've truly overreached in this case. Who knows what was going on in his mind just because he's got some writings. Again, we're taking it a step further. And there could be a backlash because a jury may... I really do not see a jury convicting this particular defendant of that first charge.
And if it even goes to a jury, because the judge might say it doesn't fit the elements. I get why they're doing it. First degree, life in prison, what a deterrent for anybody who wants to do something similar like this. So I agree with you. Lara, I want to move on to some other stuff, though, because we have a limited time. I want to talk about the preliminary hearing that's happening in Pennsylvania. A, for anybody who doesn't know, what is a preliminary hearing? And B, what can we expect? And this is with respect, to his Pennsylvania charges, not the New York charges.
Oh, so we're focusing on a Pennsylvania charge. So your question of what a preliminary hearing is, let me first start with that. A preliminary hearing is a hearing where a judge makes a decision on whether there's probable cause for the arrest. Is there a probable cause that a crime was committed, and is there a probable cause that this particular defendant committed the crime?
So Pennsylvania, he's facing these charges. This hearing is happening on Thursday. It's for possession of an unlicensed firearm, forgery, and providing false identification to police. What can we expect the witnesses will say? How in-depth will that preliminary hearing be? And is it advantageous for Thomas Dickey, who's representing him in Pennsylvania, and also maybe for his New York lawyers, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, to hear a little bit about how the prosecution's going to prove, these possession and forgery charges, because that is similar to what he's facing in New York. So I wonder if I think it's going to be pretty easy that there's probable cause here. He committed these more simplistic crimes, but I also imagine it's probably advantageous for the defense because they can kind of see where the prosecution's going, right?
Look, it may be advantageous because they get a glimpse of the evidence that's coming their way. But at the same time, when a defense attorney, is doing a cross, it's very helpful to know everything, right? And this is they haven't had a lot of time to prepare for the case. So to do a preliminary hearing in such a short time without the added advantage of doing discovery or going through a discovery process and figuring out the breadth or the remaining discovery, I don't think is that advantageous. It's very helpful for the defense to know what the prosecution has, pretty much everything that they have, and then do their cross-examination and defend their client so that they have a good strategy. But again, those aren't the real, what we're facing in Pennsylvania are minor charges, right, compared to what the defendant is facing in New York. So maybe that it's not a bad idea to do that and get a glimpse of or a preview of what the evidence is.
I also want to talk about extradition. So that's going to come up as well. There's talk about whether or not he will waive extradition. But then there's also a question is it advantageous, again, similar idea, to maybe see the prosecution's case? Because I guess in an extradition hearing, the prosecution has to present some evidence about why he should be extradited to New York. And that's really where the focus is. Do you think he's going to waive extradition, or do you think he's going to continue to contest it? What do you think?
Well, I can't give you an answer as far as what he's going to do or what his lawyers are going to do. But again, if the lawyer's goal is to find out more information through the Pennsylvania case, then we know what they're going to do, right? They're going to buy themselves time and not waive and then go through the entire process. But look, they can do the same thing in New York, right? They can go through that process. And it's a very strategic thing as far as the attorneys are concerned. And they probably know they have more information than any one of us does. And again, it all depends on what their strategy is. If they think that it's helpful to them to find out more information while the case is in Pennsylvania, maybe they can do that. But I honestly don't see it as a huge advantage. It makes sense for him to just waive, not waste time there, and just bring him here, bring him to New York, and go through the discovery process and figure out their case in New York, which they can do anyway.
And by the way, because if you contest extradition, right, you're just, I don't want to say wasting time, but you are in a sense, I mean, he's going to lose that. There's no chance he would win extradition and not be extradited to New York.
He's going to get extradited. We all know that. But again, he's entitled. It's a process. It's there. He's entitled to it. And again, it's a matter of strategy, right? As far as the attorneys are concerned, and I'm sure the two attorneys or the two teams are speaking to one another, and they're on the same page as far as what makes sense. And who knows what's going on, right? They've got a client. Maybe they're also trying to evaluate him. They're doing a psych eval. There's all sorts of things that are happening behind closed doors that you and I are not privy to. And that's going to be those are things that would be factored into their decision making, right? As far as, do we want to buy ourselves time, and do we want to get a glimpse of the evidence in the Pennsylvania case, and that would be like a window, right, to the evidence in the New York case. And look, it's not going to hurt them one way or the other. Again, it all depends on what's going on internally with the team.
We will get a little bit of a window into what's going on Thursday from this extradition hearing and the preliminary hearing. So one of the first stages in this legal process for Luigi Mangione. But Larry Uretzian, thanks so much for coming on and breaking it down for us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.